So
Under more, under participants.
here we go. Got it. All right. So
Under,
oh, perfect. All right, perfect. So now I can rename.
okay, so it's Carolyn. It's Carolyn.
Carolyn. Yep.
Burke, Burke.
Perfect. I'm sorry, Mrs. Burke. Forgive me for not.
It's fine. Fine.
Perfect. So I think we should be good to go from here.
I know Michael Palladino from NESDEC was going to join us.
Right. So I think if someone's co-host, then Eric, are you still co-host?
So it says, Michael is saying that
I promoted him to panelist
Yeah, so he should be.
twice, so he's got to accept it.
Michael, let me just tell him. Michael, you were promoted to panelist, so you have to see. You see him? Oh,
yep, he's there.
There he is.
Okay. So I think we're all set. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Happy to help. Sorry, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, well, now that we have our technical difficulties worked out and seems we have all of the necessary participants, let's call our meeting to order at 6:39 p.m. We need to start with a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Although actually, before we do that, I want to amend tonight's agenda because we do not have the minutes from the December 13th meeting. So I'd like to remove that approval from our agenda for tonight.
I will second the motion to amend the agenda.
Okay, all in favor, roll call vote.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye.
Don Nicholson, I just clobbered Phil.
Sorry, I heard you both.
And Eric Brown, aye.
And Carrie Lawrence, aye. Okay, then having approved our amended agenda for tonight, we can move on to our workshop with our search consultants. Thank you both, Carolyn and Michael, for joining us tonight, and we appreciate your help and support with this process.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
You're welcome.
All right, shall we get started?
We shall.
All right, we sent a meeting guideline. I don't know if you got it, if I can hold it up here to the camera. I'm just going to be working my way through that. It was the first page of your handout, and it refers you to the timeline, which is the second page of your handout. And we're down in the bottom section now, in that rose-colored section. And if anybody has any questions, just stop me. I'm just going to go ahead as if you all are following along.
Yeah.
So in that rose-colored section at the bottom, that's where the school committee does its work. So the position has been advertised. There has been focus groups and an online survey. All of that information was gathered and given to you, the school committee. You looked through it, changed it, and approved a successful candidate profile. That profile was given to the screening committee. The screening committee used that as a lens to look at applications, and it used it as a lens to develop questions and then to choose whom to move forward to the school committee. And you'll use it in the same way when you're thinking about what questions you're going to ask and when you're thinking about who is the best fit for your district. And that's that Mendon-Upton successful candidate profile. And in that, when we get to developing our questions a little bit later tonight, in your profile, you had 3 areas where you said you want your successful candidate to have real expertise and real deep experience. And that was being organized and strategic, being an organized strategic leader. The second was whole student focused, that's looking at every aspect of the student rather than focusing on any one, and collaborative and inclusive leader. Now, those are broad topics. So under each one are bullets. And that's what Mendon-Upton says this person would be doing if they had that deep understanding. It would be, these are indicators. So how will you know if the person has what Mendon-Upton is looking for? If they've done these things, if you feel they're capable of doing these things. There's also a section that says tasks and challenges in year one. And later when we're talking about questions, we'll come back to this document, because you can take any one of the indicators, like under the category of, I'll pick a category here of collaborative inclusive leadership. It says, has the proven ability to work effectively with school personnel, the community, and municipal leaders to create an effective pre-K to 12 educational budget. You have to know whether the person can do that. And you'll have to make a decision as the committee. How are you going to find out? Is it through your interview question? Is it through your site visit? Is it through your reference calls? But if you're developing questions, you can take a declarative sentence and say, tell us how you did this, or or if you want to be more open-ended, you can say, talk about the process you used to develop the district budget, and then you listen for this. So you can take these declarative sentences, these bullets, and turn them into questions. But you should keep them in mind when you're trying to decide on a successful superintendent for your district. How can you get at this information? And it may be through, and later I'll talk to you about making reference calls, but it might be through reference calls. It might be asking the candidate to bring artifacts, and it might be through questioning. All right, so that's the successful candidate profile. I will just refer to that profile a number of times. You have access to the applications, of course, and when you read over the applications, those are confidential, and they will become part of the successful candidate's personnel file. So that access key is a confidential key. Now that it is in the school committee's hands, who will be the liaison to the press and the public from the school committee? Who, do you know?
It's not something we've talked about up till this point, no.
Right, so let's talk about that. Usually, NESDEC is not the liaison. If we get questions about the search, we just say we facilitate a process, we refer it back to the district. And all school committee members would be well advised to refer to whoever the spokesperson is named to be. So maybe you'll think about that now, and you want to talk about that?
Well,
Go ahead, Sean.
the traditional role is for the chairman to do that. I don't know if anybody has any other ideas.
No, it is usually the chair.
Yep.
Unless the chair designates someone.
No, and that makes sense. So I'm fine doing that.
Okay. So I'm just going to write that down.
That was Carrie?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'll be this liaison to the press and the public.
Yeah.
Michael Palladino and I are available to you and available to the school committee as consultants, but we stay behind the scenes and facilitate the process. It has to be, and has to both be and be perceived to be, a school committee search.
Yeah, that makes
Okay.
sense.
You also are going to, as Vicki has done right up till this point. You'll have to work with some in-house people, staff, because if you're planning site visits, et cetera, you really have to, you can't do that in a vacuum. You have to work with the people in the district to make sure that day can work like that. And you have the principals know that somebody's going to be coming around if you choose to do that. So what we're going to do tonight is talk about how you want to go about. So I have the rest of the planning, but I'd like to give you the overview. We're going to talk about where you want to go for next steps, and you have options. You can interview your 2 finalists and then invite them for a day in the district. You could invite them for a day in the district and interview them that evening. You could invite them for a day in the district and interview them 2 days later. You can do whatever you want. You cannot invite them for a day in the district. You can choose at some point if you want to visit your candidate's district. Or you can say, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it through deep reference calls. So all of these things are, you're going to talk through tonight to make some decisions. You'll decide whether you want to do your interviews in person or if you want to do them like this, online. You will be deciding whether you want your day in the district to have a candidate come to your district and walk around, or would you like to set up a series of this type of meet and greet with staff, with parents, with students. And there are many options for that too that we can talk about. Would you like to start with some of those decisions? And I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Yeah, that sounds like a great place to start. Sounds like, folks, we need to start with determining how we want to do that interview process. And question, Carolyn, since one of our 2 candidates is an internal candidate, is there any recommendation or suggestion as to how that might work differently with that in mind?
As much as possible, try to have the internal candidate treated in the exact same way as your external candidate, because we want the community and the staff to perceive this person as the potential superintendent and ask her the questions that would go with that, and to give her the opportunity of having those same interactions, because people will be forming opinions and we want her to have the same opportunities.
Right. Okay, so there are any thoughts on how we might want to structure the interview process in a day in the district? And I can say from, my personal experiences going through this process as an employee, a lot of times we've had the candidates come in for their day in the district and have opportunities to answer questions from a lot of different constituent groups, and sort of, you would have one do their interview questions in the morning and then meet groups in the afternoon and then flip-flop it for the other candidate is, for example, one of the ways that I've seen it done in some of the districts where I've worked. But if there are some suggestions or preferences.
If you have both candidates in the district at the same time, then that you just work the logistics so that they sort of spiral around one another. And then you give one candidate free time and say interview one from 6:30 to 6:45, or no, 7:30 or 7:45, and then the other one from 8, maybe an hour and a half or whatever you decide for the evening interview. And we will give you response sheets. You can either have paper response sheets, or we can give you something to put up on your website, which goes to a Survey Monkey, so that the community and I can give you samples of those questions if you decide to do that way. The community, after they've met the candidate or seen the candidate or even seen the interview in the evening, can go to the webpage, and there's questions such as, now that you've had an opportunity to see this candidate, do you feel that he or she would make a good superintendent for our district, and why, et cetera, et cetera. So I can show you those questions. There's 3 or 4 questions. They're open-ended enough for people to give their feedback. You want to have an opportunity to read those over too. After the person has been in the district, you can ask them a question in your evening interview, like, now that you've spent the day with us, what have you learned, or what do you feel? But then you also want to have either stream those interviews for a day or 2 to let people who didn't have an opportunity to come or to see them. And then you want to also read the feedback forms. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. So thoughts on how to structure the day in district and interview process?
I think if we can do it all in one day, to your point, Carrie, and the way you were talking about it, I think that would be a good approach. It would be I'll call it the least intrusive way as well. But also, I think it'll give us an opportunity to get the groups, are going to be kind of engaged through one day versus multiple days. So I think that would be good as well. So I just think what you're talking about is a good approach.
Agreed. I think you get the best, the most likelihood that the same people are going to see each of the candidates if you do it on the same day.
So this would be at which school?
Are you asking me? Usually what you do is the person will arrive somewhere at 8:30 in the morning and be greeted by a school committee member, if they so choose, and escorted around the district to all different schools.
I see.
And the principal of that school greets them and takes them for however long you've scheduled them. You might not have everybody see every school, but you try to give them a flavor of elementary, middle, high, and a time and we'll give you samples of days in the districts and how to schedule it. But you want them, you first think of who do you want to have an opportunity to meet them, and what would you like to see of them? So you want to give them a chance to take sort of an overview of your facilities. You want to see them interact with high school students. You want to see them interact with staff at different points in time. And then if you can't schedule people in, you can always do a Zoom, like in those after school hours. You could do something, for instance, if I were a candidate, something where you can each ask me a question, or you can ask people to submit questions in advance and Kerry would ask them all, like another parent is asked or another student, or you have one student asking all the student questions, that type of thing. So there's multiple ways to do that. If you have 30 people on Zoom, sometimes it's hard for everybody to get their question asked, but if they submit them in advance, then you can sort of ask or say to people, we'll have up to 15 questions. Everybody can ask one, no longer than 3 minutes per person, all different ways.
I agree. I agree with the team so far. I think a one-day process would be the best.
And it's doable because you only have the 2 candidates. So it would seem to me that you could get that done certainly within the day.
Right. So the next steps then would be for us to give Vicki as still our liaison, is she not? I know that Carrie, you're the spokesperson, but Vicki, you continue to be. We just keep piling the work on. She hasn't screamed yet. No ambulances have arrived. We take that as a good sign. When we hear sirens, we go on to the next person. So, but anyway.
Vicki doesn't scream.
So what we'll do is give you some sample days in the districts, how you might schedule days in the district, and then you would work with whomever it is you've been working with in the district. Usually it's somebody who can have access to all of the principals, and somebody out of the superintendent's office or assistant superintendent or whomever. So we can talk offline, and you get that scheduled for their day in the district. And I know you can also post these days. You should post these days in the district. So that's very important, because school committee members are welcome to participate in any part that you can. So somebody might say, well, I can only do 2 hours in the morning. I'd like to sit in on the staff questions, or I'd like to sit in on the whatever. Just make sure you do it fairly. So if you do for one, do for the other, or however you can do it. So, somebody might say, well, I can escort a candidate around, but there's going to be 2 candidates in the buildings, 2 candidates at the same time. So somebody might say, all right, I'll escort candidate A, you do B, but I have to leave at lunch. So who's going to relieve me and do X? Or do you switch off to the 2 escorts? One does one in the morning, and then they switch off, and take the other person's candidate for the day. You also can invite the candidate to supper, or a lot of times the person just needs to decompress, and you say, here's 2 or 3. We'll either order in a sandwich for you, and you can eat over here and chill, or we'll go out, or here's 2 good places you might want to go, however it is, and give the person a little bit of downtime. Try to give them a little bit of time to catch their breath. But it is also a good time for school committee members to ask questions in the car. If you're driving a person around, you can always say, hey, what about that school budget? Et cetera, et cetera. So it is a way to talk and to see the candidate and listen to how he or she, or how she responds to the yeah. So planning that, and if you've got them posted, then it's fine. If you go over quorum and people are there and they're asking questions, you can't deliberate, but you can certainly participate, because you're the people making the decisions, and you need to see what you need to see, and you can decide. Some districts do that. The person either zooms in with the a couple of municipal leaders, or talks on the phone for a half hour, or however it is. So when you're designing the day, just think about that and who you want to see the candidates. When you interview, you have to have questions, of course, interview questions. And how long do you want the interview to be? Vicki and Phil, you experienced the hour-long interview. What would be your recommendation? To have longer for the school committee, or do you think the hour will be fine?
Well, I would suggest that we plan for an hour and a half at least, just because I think, the interviews that we did as a group to screen were much higher level, and I think in the school committee interviews we'll want to get more deeply into many of the subjects.
With follow-ups, etc.
Correct.
Right. So I'm going to jump to that part of the agenda for a minute. And we'll take some time and then we'll come back. But in your packet is a very partial list of themes for interview questions. There's also, again, the successful candidate profile that has themes for interview questions. Now, with the screening committee, we took down everybody's themes and then worked on how to ask questions, and they submitted questions. But what we're going to do for the school committee is you will be giving us the areas you're interested in writing a question around, and Carrie or Vicki will make note of it. Then you will prepare your questions. That's it. You don't submit them for approval. You prepare your questions and submit them, if you choose, to the chair ahead of time or not. The chair will call on, it's just like you have to defer to the chair to organize the meeting. She'll say, next question, Vicki, please, or next question, Sean, please, etc. Or however you arrange for it. But you have your questions, and you should prepare, I would say, 3 questions each in case it goes around, and have your third question something that you might say, you know, if I can't ask it, then that's something I can get at another way through reference calls or something. When you're asking your questions, if you have follow-ups, you just signal the chair that you have a follow-up and see. She'll be monitoring the time or however you choose to do it, and let you know if you have time. But as Phil said, it should be more of a conversation and we're getting a little bit deeper. So just, do you have an idea, either under a title of, under your successful candidate profile, those 3 categories of strategic organized leader, whole student focused leader, collaborative inclusive leadership, or under any one of these themes? Are you ready? Do you want to take a minute, and then we'll start hearing what your themes are, to make sure you're not stepping on each other's toes and asking 4 questions about the same thing. So just signal when you think you are ready. And I have to make another point. You're not asking a question so that everybody, you know, stands up and does the wave and says, huzzah, that was the most beautifully asked question I've ever heard. You're doing it to get at information that you need as a school committee member to make your choice. So if you need to know something in order to make your choice, you ask the question. It can't be anything about their age, whether they'd move their kids into your school district, or whether they would attend the local church or move to your district, or whether they're married or anything like that. But anything other than personal information, you should be able to ask what you need to know to make a decision. And I'll turn it back to you, Carrie.
Does everybody need some more time to review the areas, or are we ready to start talking about areas of focus for questions?
Are you having difficulty selecting?
Well, I guess maybe a question back for you folks is, what would be a normal approach here? Right? This is probably the first time any of us have sat in this meeting. Yeah, I mean, if we got 6 school committee members, if we're targeting 3, I mean, that's 18 questions, right? I think there's a very comprehensive list here. There's probably some other stuff that we should probably, you know, draw out a little bit. I mean,
All right.
I've never done this kind of thing, but questions that really get into examples. Give me an example of a time, and then, you know, base your question. I really like, and some of these here work really well for that. Some of them I think we can do. And then, I mean, candidly, you're going to ad-lib some along the way, because you're going to hear something from one question that when you get to your 3rd round, that's what you're really going to want to, hey, let's go back to that and pull on that thread a little further.
Which is fine. And there's, and believe me, there's samples in your packet of school committee questions.
They're great.
And there's pages, there's examples of candidate questions There's examples of questions for final interviews. You don't have to come up with those now, because, and Vicky and Phil can give you the questions that the screening committee asked, and any questions that they wish they asked. After the end of the deliberations, members said, you know, we wish you could ask this or that of this person. But what you want to do now is say, I'm generally interested in union relations and negotiating. That's a broad topic that I'm interested in. Somebody else might have a broad topic of facilities. Somebody else might have a broad topic of special ed laws and regulations, that type of thing. So if you have 2 areas or 3 areas, prepare 2 questions if that's all. You don't have to do 3, but sometimes it's good to do 3 or have enough people do 3 in case, you know, you have the time.
And also, again, on those themes, so for example, or take collaborative inclusive leadership, right? And under those bullets and things, if there's one that says can connect to both Mendon and Upton communities, strives, in other words, so your question should be related to the fact that all of these things came out in the surveys and in the focus groups, and this is, so people were looking for these kinds of topics to be questioned. So your question should be directed and based on some of these. So if you have an affinity for that area of collaborative inclusive leadership, then look at those bullets under there and then form your questions based on those topics that are under there. That doesn't mean you can't ask other questions, but you also want to get at what your focus groups generated for you and the profile that was developed based on those focus groups earlier.
And don't ask what will you do. Just talk about, based on your experience, talk about how you.
Yeah.
Talk about how you designed community relations. Talk about the communication network you designed, that type of thing.
How would you connect Mendon and Upton based on things that people
You've
have
already done.
raised, right?
Okay, so what do you want us to accomplish right now? Are we talking about
Just
building
talk,
the?
yeah, just talk about the 3 areas you want to write questions around.
Right. Like, for
Right,
example,
well-
I might speak up and say that I'm really interested in like pulling at some of these bullet points, the knowledge around special education laws and regulations, and I might want to formulate a question around that. I think is
Okay.
what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Would that be an example of what we're trying to accomplish? So
Yes,
I'm just
right.
kind
So-
of saying, I
so
want to
just-
own that area in terms of generating a question for the interview.
Right, so write that down, Carrie, that Carrie picks
Yep.
special education
Okay.
laws and et cetera.
I think that was a hypothetical statement, but you've got it now, Carrie.
No, it actually wasn't hypothetical. That is one of the areas, you know, I feel like we all bring our areas of expertise to this process as well. So like, that's an area I feel like I know, so that I could ask a question and then follow up questions based on that. So like, Sean, I look at you and Phil and Eric and say, I hope that you guys are going to take and own some of the questions around the budget process, because that's something that you know and understand better than I do. So I would kind of encourage and push you guys towards some of those areas when we're looking to formulate questions, is just sort of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Well, I was also thinking I don't know if it's more appropriate to have someone else on the committee ask questions like this, but I really am curious about what the strategies have been in other school districts around getting our students back to the levels we saw pre-pandemic, and trying to understand curriculum from that point of view.
Then that's exactly right. You could, that's a question. I understood it. I could answer it. So, I mean, not well, but I understood it.
Yeah.
So like a pandemic recovery question?
Yeah,
Sean?
something like that. Or just methods of measurement, methods of trying to accelerate student learning during this time, and even though we're still sort of in the throes of a pandemic, but recovering to the point where we were pre-pandemic.
I think that's a really good question.
I think
So that's yours, Sean.
I will piggyback off of that, and I would take the pandemic recovery, but focus on the mental health, like social emotional aspects.
I also have I have
Huge
another
area.
question I was actually asking in one of the budget meetings, which was, how would you quantify, in your experience, the level of education provided by a school district? So, and this is really around the topic of communicating to the public, communicating to the community members, and talking to them about what they're getting for their money, and what level of support is necessary to maintain the level of education that we all expect out of the school.
If you're on a particular subcommittee too, you might want to think about that.
Yeah, I think that's relevant to the budget committee. So that's a budget committee question.
I mean, I think we definitely need to get a question in there, and maybe you guys, this has already come through as part of the subcommittee, but around the fact that we are a regional school, right? And so, what are the experiences working? Really, I mean, we ultimately fall into a kind of a third town within the two towns, right? And so, how do you work both the relationships and the politics of that setup? I think, I'll just kind of rattle off a couple here that I have real quick. I think, a second one is around strategic initiatives that they've been involved in, right? And I think we can, not to overplay it, but I think we can call out, what the previous two administrations have done of launching, developing, and maintaining a Spanish immersion program. Pretty big, pretty rare, one of the few in Massachusetts, but that's a big launch. What is an example of something that you've launched or been a part of, and what has been the success of it within a school system? And I think somewhere along the way, you got to gingerly probe at it. But I'm going to kind of go back to a conversation I had with Phil the first day I showed up for a school committee meeting. But what are the 4 or 5 key responsibilities of our superintendent? Kind of stating what we think they are. And then, kind of asking the question open-ended, hey, what do you think of those 4 is your strongest capability? And which one do you have the most opportunity to build on as a professional? And see if we can pull on those strings.
I like that.
I think you guys are well on your way. I mean, yeah, those are good questions. And that question around the strategic plan also came up, was a big area of that people were concerned about when they were giving us feedback as to the things that they thought the new superintendent should be focused on.
So we could stay tonight and you could each pick your 3, or you could know to have 3. And when you're listening to each other's round 1, and you say, gee, they just asked what I had as my 3rd, you wouldn't ask it? Or do you want to stay on and pick your 3 tonight? I don't want to put anybody on the spot, since you'll have the week after the Christmas holiday to write your questions. You're not going to be doing any interviewing then.
So
Hold on. Go ahead, Phil.
Which was to have a Google document, and people can just add into it their subject areas or focus areas and their questions, so that other people can see it. And then when we get together after the holiday, we can then kind of focus, align, and all of that.
Yes, that's a good point, Phil. You can only have one-way communication when you're not sitting in open session, but you can put it, you can send your question in. You can't comment on each other's questions, but you can see what other people are asking and say, gee, I was going to ask that same thing. And Phil and Vicki, do you have the questions from the screening committee that you could provide the group?
Yes, I can send those to everybody.
Okay, and there were some questions, there may have been some questions that people said, we'd like to hear more from this candidate about X or Y. And if you have those, or just a general area, you can include that or not.
Yeah, so I would go so far. So Eric, I think you mentioned Spanish immersion. I think you were focused on that as more an example of a strategic initiative, but I would actually go so far as to ask a specific question about SI, because that's certainly something that came up during our screening committee meetings as something parents had concerns about. So I would probably want to have a question specifically about that.
Absolutely. So,
Okay. So it sounds like there's a suggestion from Phil, and I think it's a good one. How about following this meeting, I'll go ahead and set up a Google document, and I can throw in here, I've been taking some notes on some of these areas that people are wanting to talk about. I can throw those in there, and we can use that platform to start building our questions. Does that sound okay to everybody?
sounds great.
Okay.
Sometimes as an organizing factor, whether you can take a look at the profile at the 3 main categories. And if you, when you are putting in your question, just put a, if it would fit under one of these 3, you know, say this would fit under here, this would go under there. That way you can see if you've got 8 questions under 1 and nothing under 2 or 1, you know, that way it's an organizing way to look at your questions to see if you're asking heavy on one end and not on another.
That's a good call out.
Okay, so that, I'm sorry, my phone, I'll mute. All right, so I apologize for that. I didn't think to take the extension out of here. I have my father-in-law is 102 years old, and I took the phone out of his room because we were dialing everywhere. I think we were dialing Mars at some point. He just was using it to change the channels on the TV. We also got a bill from Comcast because, you know, where it says, if you're interested in this, press OK. Well, all he saw was the press OK, and we were pressing it all day long. Okay. Let's see that one. Okay. All right. So you also have a format for the interviews where someone has to play the role that Vicki and Phil did. If you're going to have in-person interviews where you decide where's the candidate going to go before they enter the room for their interview. And then as the chair, Carrie, you would welcome, you would ask an icebreaker, and there's sample icebreakers in what we gave you. And I'm going to give you the same advice I gave to the screening committee, is be careful that your icebreaker doesn't allow the candidate to take charge of the intuit and run away with it. You know, if you say to them, so why us and why now and etc., they could still be talking a half hour later. So you want to make sure that you say something about, in 5 minutes or less, could you tell us X? They will have spent a day in the district, and you might want to say, now that you've had, even for your internal candidate, now that you've had a chance to look at this district as a prospective superintendent, tell us something you learned today or an insight that you gained today that you didn't have before you had this opportunity, something like that. And you also want to close the interview and have a closing question. You can assign it to somebody, or you can come back and ask it yourself, Carrie, and there's examples of those in there. You know, is there something that you would like the communities of Mendon-Upton to know, or the school committee to know about your candidacy that that perhaps we haven't asked, or you haven't had an opportunity to share, something like that.
So, Caroline, if you don't mind me backing up for a minute, and I apologize if I missed it, you said it earlier, is the idea that we kind of talked about is that we'd have them in for a day, right? I get it, we'll meet them, tour them the school, set up small groups, whatever, that's all great. And then we would do the interviews that night as a school committee meeting?
Right, in person.
And that's what you said, like a dinner or something like that, or a downtime in between. Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to think, right? So if we're going to do, when you say 90 minutes earlier, were we thinking 90 minutes per candidate for interviews?
Well, what you would do, yes, what you would do is maybe interview 1 it could start even at 5:45, you know, 5:45 to, what is that, 7:15?
Yeah.
And then another one from 7:30 to
9.
9. Yeah.
Okay.
If that's 90 minutes, I would suggest you try to do 75 minutes or something like that, and give yourselves a little bit of a breather in case the candidate runs over. You're not,
Yeah, sure.
you know,
Yeah.
freaking, but you have that time to explore a little bit different. People do it all differently. Sometimes people say, okay, we're going to ask questions for 60 minutes. And then if there's people in the audience and they would like to come up and ask a question of the candidate, knowing the parameters that it has to be, you can say, we have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions. And if it is an inappropriate question, you know, I was in one district where it was racially charged, you know, the chair has to just say, thank you for your question, but, you know, under regulations and laws, we're not going to move forward with that or something, if you can handle it. But I don't think anybody's going to get up, and that's so rare. But it's sometimes very interesting for the committee to see that, to see how they respond to questions. You can choose to do that or not if you end up with extra time.
Yeah.
Okay. These are things for you to be, we don't have to make all these decisions tonight. There's reference checks. Did you get the reference grids for each of the candidates? Have you received those yet, Vicki?
Are they in the packet?
Not in tonight's packet. If you haven't received them, I'll make sure that you get a reference grid. It's a little bit like Noah's Ark. Each candidate, it might have come for the one for the announcement of the candidates. And if it didn't, then we'll make sure that you get it.
Okay, it doesn't sound familiar. I would remember an arc, but.
Well, I mean, I only say Noah's Ark because I say to the candidates, please give me the name of 2 parents, 2 students, 2 fellow administrators, 2 this, 2 that, 2 that, to get the ball going, and 2 supervisors, 2 municipal employees, 2 X, 2 Y. And they provide these grids. Now you can call anybody you want, but generally you start with these grids. And one way that districts do it is to say, you know, I'm really interested in I'll call the principals for both candidates. Another one says, I'll call the parents for both candidates. Another one says, you know, I'll call the teachers union president for both candidates, that type of thing. You divvy up the reference grid and you make the calls. And I will I'll give to Vicki to give to you. You can ask whatever you want, of course, but I will give you sample reference questions that you might want to look at, which allow you to put in the topic of your choice. For instance, given this candidate, how do you think he or she did on whatever it happens to be? So I'll try to help you out there, but you'll have to make a decision as a committee as to how you're going to divvy these up when you get them. And some people say, well, you know what, my expertise is budget, and I'm not seeing anything here about selectmen and budget, but I still want to do that for both candidates. That's fine. You can call, you don't have to take somebody that's on this list. The benefit of the list is that you have email addresses and you have phone numbers. A strategy that I like to use is that I develop like a little saying in an email. So when I'm with the school committee in Mendon-Upton and so is given your name as a reference for the position of superintendent of schools, I would love to talk to you if you have 10 to 15 minutes available. You can even attach a sample of your questions or whatever, and please either text or give me a time that would be convenient to talk with you, and then I make a little schedule up of phone calls I have to return. So that's one way, rather than cold calling, trying to get Vicki and she's not in, or Michael and he's not there, and you're calling back and leaving messages. So that's one easy way to do it. Do you have any particular ways that you'd like to do that when you get the grids, divvy them up, or do you want to just be assigned to people, assigned a category? How do you want to do it?
I seem to recall it when we we were involved in a reference check at one point. I think it was a conference call. It was a Zoom meeting, I believe. And a few of us were actually on that. It'd be interesting to have more than one of us participate in interviewing the references, just to get more than one opinion about the answers to the questions, the feelings you get. Because references tend to be hesitant about giving out any kind of negative information. So you need to have more of a two or more perspectives to understand the nuances in some of the things that people are saying. So I think it might be wise to have more than one person on the call for reference checks.
That's an interesting question, Sean. Like, was that a reference? So at some point, do we as a school committee confer with, obviously not for the internal candidate, but for the other candidate, the school committee for their district? Is that part of like one of the, is that part of the process at all? Because I think that's what Tom's referring to, that we were involved. So is that a reference check, or is that just sort of like a get to know your candidate kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know.
That I think that might have been a form of a site visit.
Yeah.
To the thing, because you have to be very careful when you mention Zoom, because everybody is advised that when you are an employer or you work with somebody, all you do is say, yes, they worked here, and give out no information. So people are very leery about giving out information, especially I think if it was on Zoom and they were worried and it's this. So it's, we try to say, could you, in what capacity have you known or worked with the candidate? And then could you please give me an impression of his or her leadership style? And have you ever had an opportunity to see this candidate in a position where somebody strongly disagrees with her, and how they've reacted? Have you ever seen this candidate working with through the budget process with municipalities? And can you give me an example of that, whatever your field is? But you have to be careful about asking questions that the person, it can come around. And if they're savvy enough and they think the person was just awful with the unions, they might say, I really haven't had an opportunity to see that. I really couldn't speak to whether that's a strength. I mean, I know I've been asked by people, well, would you hire this person if you had an opportunity to do so? And I've said, actually I have an opening. And I'm looking at candidates. And if that doesn't say something, I don't know what does. If I'm not looking at them. But we can talk about that. Why don't I send you the samples and Vicki, you can send it out to everybody, of sample questions to ask and the grids. And maybe you can. When is your next meeting?
Off the top of my head, no.
January 10th.
Yeah.
I think you should move a little bit faster. Do you want to have a why don't you plan another workshop like this to schedule, unless you want to do it tonight, schedule when, if it's going to be the same evenings as the day in the district, I think you need to find out when you can do your days in the district and look to be doing them somewhere around the first week in January or that week of the 10th. You might want to think about doing your days in the districts and your evening interview that week, so that these other organizing questions of doing your reference checks, maybe.
Yeah, in the schedule here, you've got the 14th is essentially the last day for the days in the district and the interviews.
Although those were guides, we were hoping. But you also, one of your candidates is a finalist in Hingham, is announced as a finalist. And you want to watch their timeline too.
Do you know what that timeline is? Because that was definitely something we wanted to be conscious of.
Well, everybody is conscious of everybody else's timelines. So I think they might be, I mean, theirs was going to be around the 10th or the 11th, you know, make their choices in there. But then some of their candidates are finalists in other districts. And so they're looking to tighten it up. I don't think you could tighten it up to that extent, but you don't want to be out so far that that you really basically don't have two candidates.
Yeah.
And make the suggestion that we have maybe another planning session, to your point, that early part of the first week of January. And then we
Like
look
the
for
3rd or the
availability.
4th.
Yeah. And then we look for availability either, I don't really want to say Friday, but maybe Monday or Tuesday of the following week.
So that would be the 10th. So the first week in January is Monday the 3rd, Tuesday the 4th, and then the following week is Monday the 10th, which is a school committee meeting, and then Tuesday the 11th.
So you might want to see who's ever going to be checking, whether you can do a day in the district on the 10th or the 11th and do your evening interviews. You already have a school committee. I don't know what's on the agenda for that, but you already have a school committee planned. Does this seem too fast to you, Michael, or does that?
It's not too fast given, you know, the way we've been planning. It's just trying to pull all the pieces together before the 10th. And I think, was it Phil that suggested another planning meeting? I think, you know, that if we're going to do it, we should do it
The 3rd.
The 3rd, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but not waiting until the 3rd to find out if the district is available on the 10th, the 11th.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that still has to be done before the 3rd on, you know, on the committee's side. But I think, you know, to make sure we pull everything together by the 3rd. That way we can, you know, we should have the dates scheduled. We should have all of, you know, the possible interview dates all scheduled and all that kind of stuff, I think. Certainly the visits. And whether you're going to do it on the 10th, but they can't do it on the 10th if you have a school committee meeting that night, right?
No, they can.
Well, I mean, I meant, I guess, yeah. Do it on if you could schedule it on the 10th, that would be your day, right?
Yeah, we could have a conflict with what's going on at the school committee meeting.
Then pick.
Why do you say we would have a conflict, Sean? That agenda hasn't been set yet.
I don't know what we're planning on relative to, I mean, I don't think we'll have anything, but we are planning on going over budget areas every single school committee meeting. So I don't know what's on the agenda for that, but according to the schedule we've been running by, I think there is some things that were slated for that area. But
Well, you don't have to, Sean. I don't want to box you in here. I think when I was saying the 10th is too late, the 10th is too late to be planning away, you know, the point is well taken. Get another workshop scheduled for the 3rd, but plan to do your day in the district with an evening interview on either 10, 11, or 12. And by that time, all the groundwork should have been done. Like, I'll send you the sample feedback survey monkey.
Right.
I'll send you the reference grids. It would be nice if, you know, if there was a way to just send in to Carrie or somebody, you know what, I'm gonna call these 3 people on her grid and these 3 people on her grid, and somebody else says, I'll call these 3 people and I'll call these 3 people. I don't think that's deliberating. Do you? I think that's simply coordinating, you know, whatever it is. So you want reference grids, you want the sample survey monkey, sample days in the district.
I think we just have to be mindful of a lot of people we're reaching out to are, you know, in the school systems. And so, you know, and we're 48 hours away from, you know, them shutting down for 10 days, right? So it's not necessarily guaranteed that some of these references we're going to be able to grab between now and the 3rd.
Oh, no. You can be calling them right up, and you can even call them after your interviews. You call them all.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
call them.
Well,
I-
plus you
I-
have, plus you have their personal numbers probably in a lot of cases where you can reach them even
Sure.
while people during the, during this,
Yeah.
during the break, if you want to make those, try to make some of those calls,
Right. Eric, you only need to have that information
Of
when
course.
you deliberate. So
Okay.
that's another thing that you have, you'll have to make a decision about. I mean, where you only have the two candidates, do you want to go and visit the other candidate's district, or are you going to do it through reference checks, reference calls? And that would be to Sean's point, that's when you might say to the candidate, would you set up 4 Zoom meetings for us? We want to meet with 3 teachers. We want to meet with whoever you'd like to see if you were to go to the district, and see if you can get the candidate to arrange a day of, if you choose to do that, of different groups coming on. You just give them, what I do is if I'm going or suggesting you go to a district for a site visit, is you say to the candidate, we definitely want to see this person and this person, and we definitely want to see this and this and this. So then they schedule your visit for you. And you can do the same thing. Say, we'd like to be able to log on to a Zoom. We'll set up the link, or you set up the link, but we'd like to have an opportunity to talk to whomever. Do you want to do that, or do you want to do it through your reference calls?
I'm just trying to think about my schedule in the new year. I think I'd prefer to do it through reference calls, but if there's somebody else who feels the need to visit another district.
I don't feel the need to visit another district if we bring them in for a day in our district.
Yeah.
I think that sounds good.
Okay, there you have it. So I will, and who will I be working with? Will I be working with, and Michael and I be working with Vicki for that day in the district and all of that scheduling and Phil, or is it?
Yeah, I can work with you on that.
Okay. So you'll be looking at, it sounds like 10, 11, or 12 to see if any one of those, and they probably could figure that out before the break this week. If they can't, they can't, but it would be nice to give them a heads up. Always, it's good for them to have a heads up, because a lot of times administrators work, over the break anyway, but to say, at least get a notice out that we're looking at which of these 3 days would be better.
If you could decide, the sooner you could decide, the sooner we could let the candidates know, right?
Right. Yeah, and I'll tell them it'll be one of those 3 days, probably.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me just look over. And if you take a look at your contract, you want to have an opportunity, maybe on the 3rd, take a look at, and you have to post that meeting on the 3rd to the workshop. But usually you say to your lawyer to take a look at the contract and make sure that, and if any of you have any concerns, give them to the chair so that the lawyer can address them in the contract, and make sure your contract is how you want it to be. Because when you are entering it, you vote when you deliberate to enter into negotiations. You don't vote to offer the position. You vote to enter into negotiations with Carrie. If you feel Carrie is the successful candidate. And then in order to enter into negotiations, you have to have something to offer. And that's usually the school committee offers a contract and the candidate responds. You have to think about a salary range, and you have to really think about a salary range that is competitive. And a competitive salary range is it's higher than what your I know we're on Zoom, but it's higher than your current salary range. A competitive salary range is probably a good 20,000 higher than what you're paying a superintendent now. So you need to be thinking about that too, as a range. A range is 180, maybe 175, 175 to 195. It's in there. So I don't want to shock your systems, but I think your candidate's going to be asking up in that range and expecting up in that range. And if you look at competitive and competing areas, they've gone up into that range. That's something for you to decide as a committee. I don't know, you might want to meet on the 3rd. If you're meeting with me, you might want to have a half an hour before that meeting to be an executive session to talk out that contractual language and things like that. And then we'll join you, or after we leave, you have that conversation. Let me see. When you have your day in the district and your interviews, then you have to deliberate. You'll have to set a time to deliberate. So say if that all happens on the 10th, then you would maybe deliberate on the 12th, or you say, we need time to absorb all of the input from the communities, all of those feedback forms. We certainly wouldn't be ready to do that before, say, the 14th, or I think on your schedule, I had it going to about the 14th. You say, well, we'll meet then, and we will we'll talk about the candidates. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable to talk about a candidate when you're in front of everybody. But what you can say is, if say my candidate is definitely Michael, I just think that, that candidate A has some real strengths, but my choice is candidate B. Then I start by saying, I've had an opportunity to talk with both candidates, and I just think both are very, very strong, and both would make excellent superintendents for a district, in a district. But we're charged with finding the superintendent that is the best match for our district. And using the successful candidate profile, listening to the interviews, I really feel that that's candidate A. They answered this question beautifully, and that question beautifully, and this question. I think candidate B had some really strong answers as well, but I do feel that candidate A would be my selection. I think is the best match. And then Eric says, I hear you. I think they were both very strong. And when I look at candidate B, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z, and think so. I'm really thinking that they would make a great position. And then you talk, and that's how you do it. You say, I hear you. That answer was very strong. But overall, I just feel personally that it's candidate A. Now you come down to a point where the chair feels that it has been discussed and you have to make a decision. Sometimes the decision is unanimous. What you do is you take if you feel that there's really one candidate in the lead, then somebody makes a motion. Generally, I make a motion that the district enter negotiations with candidate A. Somebody seconds. All in favor, aye, nay, aye, whatever it is. If they have a majority vote, well, there's your candidate. Now, somebody for the candidate B might want to take account, say, well, I make a motion X, but that it's going to come out minority. So generally, the group that is for candidate B, the nays for candidate A, the candidate B, usually one of those persons says, I make a motion that we as a school committee show our unanimous support for our incoming superintendent. And somebody else seconds that. And then you take a vote to show unanimous support for your incoming superintendent. So that it doesn't come in that somebody comes into the position and can look over and say, oh, 2 yeas and a nay. You know, you vote to unanimously support. So you don't have to talk about why somebody is not, you know, if somebody says, Michael just held eloquent, his budget knowledge is just so extensive. And nobody says, oh, Carolyn's was too. Well, there it is. He knows the budget, she doesn't, by not saying it. Okay, are we good? Do you feel good? It's a lot.
It is.
So what do you need other than I'll send you the reference grids, the sample day in the district, the sample survey. I'll send these to Vicki to send out to all of you. Anything else you need from Michael or me?
I mean, Carrie, while we're here, do we need to kind of pick when we want to meet next? I mean, do we want to, or just do that by email, offline? What's the?
I'm sorry, Eric, my internet went out there a little bit. What was your question again?
Oh, no worries. I'm just saying, I mean, we've got us all right here. I mean, do you want to have the calendar conversation as we're starting to pick next meeting dates and that kind of thing, or you want to do that, you know, via an email? What's best?
Well, it sounded to me like that we decided that piece already. So maybe I'm a little unclear. I have done here in my action items to coordinate with Lauren to post for an executive session and a school committee meeting for the 3rd of January.
Okay.
For this group.
That would, yeah, this group for another one of these planning meetings where we will be able to discuss the questions that we want to be asking. The executive session will review the contract and look at salary ranges. Am I missing anything? That I believe that was
Yeah, I guess my only question is the 3rd work for everybody?
Well, it's also, so I've just been writing things down, but it seems to me you want some sort of plan of logistics on how we're going to move through the interview days and the, you know, the escorts that are going to be done and the ante room question, all the things that you guys discussed.
Right.
If we want to do a dinner,
Right.
everything like that.
Yep.
So somebody
And the
needs to come
date
up
itself.
with a, let's call it a sample agenda.
Yeah, and the
that
day
we can use
itself,
for the interview days.
as well as the interview day itself, right?
Yep. So if you have a sample of that, it would be wonderful to see that.
Okay.
So we could build off of that.
Okay.
right.
Also,
That was
we
one
need-
of the things she was going to provide us, Sean, was the sample day in district. Is
That's
that my
fantastic.
understanding of what that is? Yeah.
Yeah. So then the other thing I have written down here is the, you know, the setup of the interview sessions themselves, because we have to have, you know, the time slot for each person, when they're going to be in, where they're going to be, you know, where the ante room is, all that stuff. And then also, how are we going to put down a definitive date for, I think we were talking about September 10th or 11th for scheduling that day, since it is so close. It's very rapidly following the holidays. We probably should nail down that date pretty quickly.
For
So
January.
all those things,
January.
yeah, January, sorry. So yeah, we've got a few things that we probably should nail down before we get into the holidays.
Right.
Right. Well, it was my understanding that was something that Vicki was going to work on, with coordinating with the building principals to figure out which one of those days would work best. Now, is it my understanding that we may want to avoid the 10th because we have a standing school committee meeting on that day, and maybe want to look at the 11th or 12th, or?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should ask the chairman what we had planned on doing for the school committee meeting on the 10th.
I can tell you that there is not an agenda that's set for that date yet, so we can set it as we see fit. It's not going to stay that way for much longer, though. So I think that if we were maybe as a group to decide tonight that we would like to shoot for the 10th and devote that school committee meeting time to doing those interviews, then if we make that decision tonight, we can do that.
Yeah, and I wish I had my information with me, but we definitely do have a budget calendar we have to pay attention to. So,
So let me say this, Vicky, if you find out that I don't know where my video just went, but if you find out that the 10th is absolutely terrific for the candidates to spend a day in the district, they can spend the day in the district on the 10th and then interview with the school committee on the 11th or the 12th. It doesn't have to be on the same day. So if you pick, if it turns out that the school committee isn't ready to do it on Monday, but you really, I think, want to do your interviews after they've spent a day in the district, but you don't have to.
Can I make the suggestion that we look at the principles, but then we look at either I think Monday there could be potential conflicts, so maybe we look at target the 11th, and we make that the primary day to target for you to ask about, Vicky.
Sure.
Because
That
it
makes
doesn't
sense.
sound like we can have 2 school committee meetings, quote unquote.
yeah, I think that's right.
You're probably going to have 3 because you're going to have your 10th meeting as usual, your interview meeting, and then your deliberation meeting. So you might meet 3 times that week. You have to do your deliberations in public. And it just depends on how long it will take you, how long you want to give the people who have participated in the day in the district and everything an opportunity to get their forms in. Or actually it's SurveyMonkey, so they'll go online and they'll write their comments based on whichever candidate. That will come into NASDAQ, and NASDAQ will give you back all of the results if you choose to do it that way. Okay, are we good?
I think we're good.
I think we're good too.
Yep.
Okay, thumbs up. Okay,
Okay, well,
all right, so
Okay.
if any of you need to ask a question, Vicky, you can give my contact information to the chair, or to whomever you wish. It's public information. All right, thank you.
hey,
I'll make a motion
Happy holidays.
to adjourn.
happy holidays to everybody.
Yes, happy
I'll
holidays.
second.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned, I'll second.
I think there were a couple of motions in a couple of seconds. So let's roll call to adjourn.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Eric Brown, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
All right,
And
thank you.
we
everybody.
are adjourned then at 7:55. Vicky, do we know how to stop the YouTube streaming?
I'm
Or if we
hoping it just
decide not
stops
to,
when we end the meeting.
Thank
We
you,
all
Carolyn,
leave and
Michael.
it stops. Otherwise, I have no idea.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.